Hello again. So I made some videos for the third project for my creative coding class, and I think those were successful, so I thought it would be useful to go back to the first and second projects and make videos talking about how to complete those as well. It's useful for me to have as a reference, and some students I think are still working on those projects, and also just generally someone else, some random person on the internet, whoever you are, you might want to do these things as well. So this is the second project in this class, and the challenge was to appropriate a text and remix it so that it becomes poetry. And we talked about different ways to do this. A lot of people chose kind of similar ways, and that's fine. And I want to talk through an example of how to do a certain kind of appropriation of a text. So there's several important concepts here. There's going to be working within Python. There's going to be getting a text file to appropriate, and then using text blob to parse out the parts of that text that I'm interested in appropriating. So let me show you how to work with these things. I'm going to be using Jupyter Notebook to create my examples here. So I'll go ahead and launch the notebook here and get into my examples folder. And I'm using a slightly different setup here, so my screen's sort of at a different resolution than I'm used to. So we'll see how this works. So creative coding and examples folder. So this is all going to be on GitHub as well. The example of remix poetry that I did was called, I call it a Franken poem, but I'm using text blob and random, and I'm importing the text of Frankenstein. I'm selecting out different parts of speech that I think are interesting, and then arranging those into things that start to look like sentences, as you can kind of see here in this output. So I'm going to go through kind of step by step how I constructed this example, but with a different example. So first of all, to work with a text that you want to appropriate, remix, whatever, Gutenberg is a great source for these kinds of things. I just got Frankenstein for that example. I was playing with Gulliver's Travels a bit, so we can take a look at Gulliver's Travels. And this is by Jonathan Swift, of course. The one that you want, so there are different versions of a file whenever you look at it in Gutenberg. The one you want is plain text. You need to always be working with plain text, basically, whenever you're doing this kind of work with Python. It's much, much easier. So you want to save it. Oops, I don't want to do that. You want to save this file. It's make sure that it's a .text. You can see in the URL it ends in .text. It doesn't matter the number, but it has to end in .text to be an actual text file. I'm going to save this here in, so I'll just do it right here. I'm going to rename it Gulliver so it's easier for me to find. Did I already do this once? I guess so. Okay, well, I'll do it again. Now it's called Gulliver.txt, and I have access to it. So now I need to make a notebook where I'm going to make a project that remixes this Gulliver's Travels. So I just made a new Python 3 notebook. I'm going to go ahead and name it Gulliver Remix and set up a few things. In Python, I'm using a Python notebook set up here. And in Python, you have to import the different modules that you're going to be using. So I need to go ahead and get some of these. Random is almost always a good choice for when you're doing generative work. You're going to end up using random eventually. I know I'm also going to be using text blob, which is a tool that lets you do all kinds of neat things to parse a text and then play with different parts of it, or learn about different parts of it. And those should be good for now. I think there was one other thing. No, that's it. Okay. So now I need to, now these are just using the libraries here. I haven't used any code from these yet. They're just available now if I need them. So I need to go into, I need to actually get my Gulliver.txt data, all of the words in that novel, into my program so that I can work with them in some way. I need to take that data into this program. So the line for that, I always forget it, so I just always have to copy and paste it. There are a couple other ways you could read this in, like if you wanted to read it in line by line, that would be differently worded. In this case, I just want the whole thing as a single big chunk, and I'm going to do it like this. So in red here, this is going to be the name of the file. Oh, this isn't very big. Let me go a bit bigger. In red, that's going to be the name of the file that I'm trying to import, that I'm trying to suck in. So I've called it Frankenstein.txt in the example, but the one I want to work with now is called Gulliver. So if you were doing this, you would have to, of course, change it to make sure that it matches your file name. Another thing worth noting, by the way, is that this Gulliver Remix notebook and Gulliver.txt are in the same folder on my computer. And I can verify that by looking at it in the directory through the Python notebook interface. So there's Gulliver Remix, the notebook that's running in this tab. And then I have gulliver.txt, which is the file I just downloaded. They're working together, they can see each other. Because the name, that's important because the name here is actually a path to that file. Because they're already in the same folder, that path doesn't have to include other directory names or any directional stuff. So it's a very straightforward way to do it. And it only works though if you have things in the same folder. If you're doing this, I recommend just having a single like projects folder and keeping everything there. Okay, so now I've got all this in here. I could do a couple things with it. So I could print all of the text in my notebook just to kind of confirm that it exists. And yeah, it does. It's all there. It's a lot. I can go ahead and clear that. I could, I could ask how long that text is. That might be interesting. It's 600,105 characters long. That's pretty good. That's kind of neat. I can't really do much with that though, because that's a very long list and there's no differentiation within that. It's really just a very long list of letters and numbers. So I don't need this cell, so I'm going to kill it. So I need text blob to turn this into something I can work with. I'm going to call it blob, but you can call it whatever you want. Just naming it blob reminds me that this is a special kind of data called a text blob. And you can do that like this. So blob equals and then text blob. You're invoking now the text blob function that I've imported from up here. And I'm going to pass that, I'm going to feed that the variable text. So that whole thing that I just printed out, I'm going to give this to text blob now, and now text blob can do something more interesting with it. So if I run that, it takes a second to digest it. Actually, it didn't take much of a second. But now if I look at the value of blob, it's the whole thing. But you notice that it's prefixed now with this thing saying text blob. So this isn't just text, it's a special kind of thing called a text blob. And it has different properties with it now. So for example, it has sentences, and this will take it a bit, I think, but if you ask it for the sentences function of a text blob, it will print you a list of every sentence in this novel. That's kind of cool because maybe you just want to look at this sentence by sentence. You can reference a specific one of these now that this is a list by giving it a list index to check. I can find out how long that list is by passing this list to the length function, len, like that. And I can see that there are 2,710 sentences now in my text blob. So if I wanted to print one, as long as I give it a number that's lower than 2,709 or 11, 9, I don't know. You'll see what I mean. As long as I get a number that it actually has something for, then you'll get a sentence back whenever you ask it for it with this notation. With those square brackets, you can just ask it, give it the number, the index of a sentence that you want to see. So if you want to ask for a random one of these, you could just have it pick a random number and then ask for that random number sentence, and then you would get it. That's 605. This is 420. Didn't mean to make a joke number, but that's how it happens. And then, I don't know, 70. So these are all, again, I have no idea what these sentences are. I'm just picking them up. Notice what happens, by the way, if I choose something that's too big. It's going to say list index out of range. So my index, which is that number there, is out of the range of this list. This list only has 2,710 elements in it, so this is going to be way beyond the end of that. So it's not going to work. Now, if I don't really want to keep in mind or know how long that is, random does a nice job of just picking a random sentence. You give it so you invoke the random library, which I imported up above here, and then you invoke the choice function, and then you feed the choice function a list, and in this case it's that list of sentences, which is just called blob.sentences. So if I just run it like that, it's going to give me a random sentence every time. I don't have to know what number it is, I don't have to give it numbers, it just gives me a random sentence. So that's pretty neat. It's already kind of poetry, maybe, or it could be used as poetry. But I want to do a few more things with this to kind of make a different kind of poetry. One of the cool things about Blob, text blob, is that you can also, for any text blob object, you can learn about the parts of speech that are used within that text blob. I'm not going to run it for the whole novel, because, well, maybe I will. that's going to take it does quite a bit of processing to get this done. It's called tags. So if you ask for blob.tags, it will now run this tags function on the full text of this novel, and you can see it's taking a few seconds. That little star symbol there means that it's still working. And okay, so it worked. So here's what it did. What it does now is it prints out every word as a tuple a tuple is a data structure that has parts to it. So in this case, the first part is the word, and then the second part is the part of speech tag that's associated with that word. Parts of speech are always context dependent. So this is what TextBlob's best guess is for what kind of thing this is. So called, it thinks is a verb. Urgency, it thinks is a noun. And that's, that's correct in both of those cases. So I think just given some basic parts of speech patterns, I think we can make some lines of poetry, and so I want to do that. I'm going to make a list here of all the nouns in this novel, and I'll do it like this. I'll call it just nouns. I'll make it an empty list first. I'm going to go ahead and make a list of verbs and a list of adjectives as well, just to have, just because, this might be useful. And what I'm going to do is work through this big long list of tags, and as I work through that, every time I find I'm going to make my screen bigger. Every time it finds a noun or a verb or an adjective, it's going to add it to the appropriate list. So I will do it like so. So if I do it like this, for a tag in blob tags, oh, my box is falling apart here. If I ask it just to print that tag, you'll see the tuples, maybe. It's going to take it a minute here to work through these. And this is not the best way to do this because you see how long it takes to run through this. But okay, so you see if I do this like that, it's going to print, every time it prints, it's printing this double structure, it's printing this tuple. I actually want to be able to reference both parts of that. So what's neat about a tuple structure is that I can actually assign labels to each part of that tuple as it runs the iteration. And you do that with this notation here. So it's, I'm going to say word, part of speech. So now if I say print, ask it to print a word, and then I'll ask it to print just the word part of that. And then I'll ask it to print the part of speech part of that. Instead of seeing it as that specialized notation with the parentheses around it because those are tuples, now I should see it print two, the expressions that I wrote here. Word equals the, part of speech equals NN. This is just me confirming that the correct thing is going into those two variables right there as it works through the list. Of course, very heavy-handed, so you don't need to go through that like so. But now I know that I have the word in question in that variable word, and I have the part of speech in question in that part of speech in that variable. So I just need to check those. So if I do that with a conditional, if I say if the part of speech is NN, then that means I have a noun. So in that case, nouns use the append function to add to the end of that list. I'm going to add the word in question. So I'm checking for the part of speech, but I'm only interested in keeping the word. So this is going to make that word like that. I can make several of these. I think I can just do it as a series of ifs. Let's find out. What was verbs? Was it VB or VBD? See, I already did this with Frankenstein, so let me see what Frankenstein I did. Okay, it's just VB. So we'll do VB. Then I'm going to add this to the verbs list. Oops. Adding the word, not the list itself. And likewise for the adjectives, which I remember has the abbreviation JJ for some reason. So now I should end up with 3 lists if this works. And I will run this, but first I want to have it print something to check it. I'm going to have it print the length of, actually no, I don't need to do that. I can do this in a separate cell. So I'm going to run this first and then see if those lists have anything on them. While the star is telling me that it's working, it just takes a few seconds on this computer. There we go. So it seems to, it ran without any errors, so that means I should have something on each of these lists. Let's see if I have nouns. Yep, I have nouns. I have some weird punctuation marks that it thinks are nouns, and I'm not sure why, but that's there. I have some verbs, and I have some adjectives. So, okay, so I've got something, and I can start making this look like poetry. I'll do 4 lines of poetry because that's a decent amount, and these are going to be just sort of abstract free verse kinds of poems. They're not really that, great as poems, but they should work. I'm just going to do for line in range 4. This is going to give me 4. It's going to run this code. Whatever I put next is going to run this 4 times. I'm going to ask it to print several of these things. In fact, I'll just do a kind of statement like this. I actually like the way I did this here. Oh, right, I have to have it choose one at a time. I can't just have it print all of these things. I'll tell you what, I'm going to actually copy this code that I did before because this takes a little while to write out. What's going to happen now is I'm creating several variables here. I'm making A1, A2, N1, N2, N3, and VB. And for each of these, I'm going to run the random choice function on each of these lists that I just checked existed from my text blob. So A1 is going to be a random adjective, A2 is going to be another random adjective, a different one probably, N1 is a different noun, and so on. And so I'm going to end up with these 6 random words, but they're random words chosen from this database of words that are from Gulliver's Travels. So I need to actually print this line now that it has these potentially 6 things in it. It would be nice to actually maybe change the variety of these lines a bit, so it's not always 4 lines of 6 words each, but we'll run with it as it is. So let me see if I can I'm just going to copy this line again because it takes a bit to type it out, and I realize this is getting kind of long. So this syntax here, I'm printing the N1, then the A1, the VB, the A2, and the N3. But each time I'm printing that, I'm separating that with a space so that they won't all smush together as like a single, super long word that has all these strange things in it. Oh, my battery's about to, I better wrap this up. I'm running this cell. It should print me some output shortly. Let's see. Running, let's find out. Hey, great. Care first say impossible exhortations. Retinue square, coincide, great map. Gold, external, shy, short equity. Direction, common, signify, rich thing. That last line kind of makes sense. I kind of like some of these things in here. But as you can see, I would have to do quite a bit more work to actually make this make sense or to deal with anything like rhyme, which is, that's project 3 for this class. So that's a whole other can of worms. But this is okay as poetry right now. And you could, if you were doing this on your own, I would recommend varying the number of lines, changing out the syntax in here. You could certainly add punctuation or other things to make it look more like a sentence. You could have it choose a different pattern to print every time, and so you could create some variety in your lines. You could choose different parts of speech to select and then rearrange. And of course you can choose a different source text than Gulliver's Travels or Frankenstein. So lots of different ways you could start with this as a template and then tweak it to make it do something that you like, which is really what matters, is something that it needs to make something that you think is good. As it is right now, I like my Frankenstein version better than Gulliver's Travels, frankly. Although I've only run this once, so maybe I should give it more of a chance. But you can kind of get a sense that Mary Shelley's writing is a bit more dramatic than Jonathan Swift's, which is very dry and academic, which is part of his